Hi Libra, how are you guys? Welcome to my channel. Welcome to Mary Tarot. We're going to do your reading, Libra.
There is a fire in your life that has been burning for a long time, and tonight you already know what I am going to tell you about it. You know it because the wood crackles differently now. You know it because the heat has changed its character. You know it because something deep inside you has quietly stopped reaching for the next log to add to it. You have not announced this knowing to anyone. You may not have fully announced it to yourself. But the knowing has been settling into you cell by cell in the small hours when you are alone, and it has reached the point where it is no longer a question. The fire is reaching its natural end, and you are not going to feed it anymore. I want to walk through this with you carefully tonight, because the way a fire ends matters. There are clumsy ways to put out a fire. And there are graceful ways. The silence you are preparing to walk into is not a clumsy silence. It is a graceful one. It is the silence that sits naturally around a fire that has been allowed to burn down to its proper conclusion, and that silence is one of the most respectful sounds in the world. Welcome to Mary Tarot, and welcome to a reading that found you precisely because you needed the language for what you have already decided. Before anything else, I want to release you from the framing that may have brought you here. The framing suggests that your silence will hurt this person. I want to offer a different way of seeing what is about to happen. Silence does not hurt. The absence of words is not an attack. It is a return to a baseline state. What may produce difficulty is the change itself, the recognition that something is ending, but the silence is not what causes the change. The silence is what honors the change. Loud goodbyes often produce more residue than quiet ones because they leave the other person with sentences to replay, with words to turn over, with material to feed the part of themselves that wants to argue. Silence leaves them with their own discernment. That ultimately is more respectful than a script could ever be. Let me describe what fires actually look like at the end. They do not go out all at once. There is a long stretch where the flames diminish, where the logs become coals, where the coals become embers, and where the embers slowly give back their heat to the air. The whole process takes time, and during that time the fire is still warm. It is still real. It is still doing the last of its work. The end of a fire is not a single moment of extinction. It is a slow, dignified release. What you have been experiencing inside this connection has been exactly that release. Not an ending in one instant, a long, careful winding down that you have been participating in for longer than you may realize. The first sign that a fire is reaching its natural end is in the sound. The crackling changes. The pop and snap of a vigorous fire becomes something quieter, something more like a sigh. The fire does not stop being a fire. It simply stops being noisy. In your situation, this is what has been happening in your conversations with this person. The exchanges have been becoming quieter, less generative, more tired. You have been noticing this without putting words to it. The conversations are not bad. They are simply softer than they used to be. They no longer crackle. The sound has shifted, and your body has registered the shift even when your mind was looking elsewhere. The second sign is in the requirements. A vigorous fire needs constant tending. You have to add wood, adjust the logs, keep the airflow right. As a fire reaches its end, those tasks become unnecessary. The fire is no longer asking for your effort. In your life, this is manifested as a small but real ease. The connection is not asking from you what it used to ask. The other person is not requiring as much management. The reduction in required effort is not abandonment on your part. It is the relationship telling you in its own quiet language that the active phase is complete and that more effort would be effort applied to something that has finished, asking for it. The third sign is the change in the heat. A fire at its peak is hot enough to keep you at a distance. A fire at its end can be approached more closely. There is a particular kind of warmth that only embers give, and it is more intimate than the warmth of flames. You can sit nearer. You can hold your hands toward it. Some of the most precious moments people share with each other happen near a quieting fire, not a roaring one. Because the quieting fire makes a different kind of presence. Possible. You and this person may have had some of those moments recently. Quiet, undramatic, almost sweet exchanges that did not have the heat they used to have, but had a different quality that was no less real. Those were ember hours. They were not failures of the fire. They were the fire's later vocabulary. I want you to receive what I am about to say carefully. The fact that a fire is ending does not mean the fire was not real. The warmth was real. The light was real. The work the fire did in the long stretch of its burning was real. You both warmed yourselves at it. You both saw your own faces by its light. The ending does not erase any of that. The ending is the natural fourth movement of any fire, and the fourth movement is part of the composition, not a flaw in it. You can love what the fire was while still recognizing that the fire is no longer what it was. Both of those truths can sit comfortably together, and tonight I want you to let them. Now I want to address the silence directly. Why silence rather than speech? Why walking rather than explaining? There is a particular intelligence in how you have arrived at this choice, and I want to honor it. Words at this stage would not produce understanding. Words would produce more words. The other person, faced with a long verbal explanation, would respond. Their response would invite further explanation from you. The conversation would extend, and during the extension, the fire would not actually go out. It would be temporarily fed by the very oxygen of the conversation. Silence is a more honest signal because silence is what actually exists at the end of a fire. Trying to explain the end with elaborate words would be a misrepresentation of what is actually happening. The other person, on some level you may underestimate, already knows. Fires that are ending tell their tale to everyone sitting near them. They tell it through the same signs you have been reading. The quieter sound, the reduced demands, the changed heat. This person has been receiving the same signals you have been receiving. They may have been less willing to acknowledge the signals consciously, but their body has been registering them. When the silence comes, it will not be experienced as something arriving from nowhere. It will be experienced as a recognition. The recognition may carry weight, but the recognition itself will not be alien. It will be the conscious arrival of something they have been sensing for a while. There is a question you may have been carrying about whether to speak first, whether to write a final message, whether to leave them with anything. I want to address this with honesty. There are situations where a final message is the right gesture. There are also situations where the right gesture is the absence of a final message, because a final message would invite responses that would extend the burning. The unseen world keeps track of which kind of situation this is, and the answer is not the same in every case. Listen to your own steady internal voice, the one that has been steering you well. It will tell you whether words are required or whether walking is the cleaner act. There is no universal rule. There is only your particular situation and your particular knowing, and your particular knowing is more reliable than a general principle. If your knowing is telling you that silence is the right form, then trust that knowing. You are not failing a duty by withholding words. The duty you owe to this person is not the duty of explanation. The duty you owe is the duty of integrity, which means leaving when leaving is true. If a long explanation would falsify the leaving by suggesting that the leaving is up for discussion when it is not, then the explanation would actually be a kind of dishonesty. Silence in that situation is the more truthful gesture. Silence says, this is what is. Silence does not negotiate. It allows the other person to encounter the reality of what is happening without the distraction of a counter argument. I want to talk about what the silence will look like from inside. Because for the person walking in silence, there is sometimes a worry that the silence will feel cold to themselves. It will not, if you allow yourself to remain warm in it. Walking away in silence is not the same as walking away in coldness. You can carry a great deal of tenderness toward this person inside the silence. You can wish them well. You can hope they find what they need. You can hold them in your awareness for a while as you walk. The silence is the form. The tenderness is the content. Many people have walked away from situations in silence while carrying a quiet, persistent care for the person they were leaving, and that care is not a contradiction of the leaving. It is a fuller version of the leaving than coldness could ever be. Mary Tarot has often described a particular kind of love that exists alongside leaving, and it is worth naming here. There is a love that does not require continued proximity. It is the love that wishes someone well from a distance, that holds them in a quiet thought without reaching toward them, that recognizes their dignity without claiming any further part in their life. This love is one of the harder kinds to hold because it has no outlet for expression. It is not declared, it is not received. It simply exists inside the person carrying it as a low, steady warmth toward a person they will not see again. You may carry that kind of love after this leaving. The carrying is not weakness. It is the integrity of someone whose heart did not turn cold even as their feet walked away. Now I want to spend some time on the texture of the silence itself, because the silence is not a simple absence. It has its own substance. The silence around a fire that has burned down is not the same as the silence of an empty room. The silence of a finished fire is full of the memory of the burning. It is layered with everything the fire was. It contains the laughter that was had near it. It contains the conversations that were carried by its light. It contains the warmth of all the times the two of you sat near it together. The silence you walk into is not empty. It is dense with what was, and that density is its own kind of dignity. The other person in the silence will go through their own process. I will not predict the shape of that process for them because their process is theirs. What I will say is that silence given to a person of any maturity eventually invites their own discernment, not immediately. Initially, silence may produce confusion or the impulse to fill the silence with their own attempts at conversation, but over time, silence does its work. The other person eventually has to encounter their own self in the silence, and that encounter is one of the most useful experiences a human being can have. By giving them silence, you are giving them the conditions in which their own clarity can arrive. That is in its own way a form of generosity, even if it does not feel like generosity to either of you in the short term. You may worry about what the other person will think of you in your absence. They will think what they think. People often construct their own version of the people who left them, and the versions are rarely accurate to the actual situation. You will not be there to correct the version. You will not be there to defend your choice. This may sit uncomfortably with you for a stretch. I want to invite you gently to let it. The interpretations people hold about us when we are not there are not our responsibility to manage. We are responsible for our own conduct, which includes our integrity in leaving. We are not responsible for their interpretation of that conduct. Their interpretation is theirs to live with. Your conduct is yours to live with. Conducting yourself with integrity is the part you can control and the only part you need to. There is a specific kind of energy that you may have been holding in your body during the lead up to this departure. A kind of held breath, a kind of postponement of your full presence in your own life, because part of you was always tending the fire that you knew was ending. Once you walk in silence, that energy returns to you. You will feel it within the first stretch of mornings. Tasks that felt heavy will feel lighter. Decisions that were postponed will become easier. The mental real estate that was occupied by this connection will reopen, and you will be surprised by how much real estate it was. The reopening is a particular kind of gift. Receive it without guilt. The energy was always meant to be yours. It was simply on loan to a relationship that needed it during its active phase. The loan is ending. The energy is coming home. You will also notice after the silence has been in place for a while that you become quieter inside yourself, not absent, not empty, just quieter. The constant low hum of managing a relationship that was reaching its end will fade, and what remains is your own actual interior without that hum. This interior may at first feel unfamiliar because the hum has been part of your inner soundscape for so long that you may have stopped distinguishing it from yourself. You will begin to distinguish. The distinguishing is one of the quieter rewards of the silence. You will rediscover the sound of your own life without that particular static, and the rediscovery will be a homecoming. Let me address the part of you that may be wondering whether you owe an explanation simply because explanation is what is socially expected. I want to question the premise of that expectation. Social expectations about how to end relationships are calibrated to a particular kind of relationship that may not be the kind you are leaving. Some endings can be handled with conversation, other endings cannot. The endings that cannot are not failures of communication. They are recognitions that communication is no longer the right tool. Trying to use communication when it is no longer the right tool is its own kind of dishonesty because it pretends the situation is something it is not. Sometimes the truest statement is the one that does not get made. The truest acknowledgement of what has happened between you and this person may be your decision not to author one more sentence about it. The walking itself is also worth describing. The actual physical and metaphorical motion of leaving, it will not feel as dramatic as you might imagine. There may be a moment, perhaps small, perhaps unremarkable, when you realize that you have already walked. The decision was made some time ago in the unseen layer of your life, and the physical expression of it is just the exterior catching up. You will not need fanfare. You will not need closure rituals. You will simply notice at some point that you are no longer where you used to be. That noticing will arrive quietly, perhaps in the middle of an ordinary task, and the noticing will be the marker that the leaving is complete. After the leaving is complete, there will be a stretch of time when you feel what is sometimes called the phantom presence. The sense that the person is still around even though they are not. The expectation of a message that will not come. The reflexive thought of telling them something before you remember that telling them is no longer part of your life. This is a normal phase. It is not evidence that you made the wrong choice. It is the nervous system updating its expectations to match new conditions. Phantom presences fade with time. You do not need to fight them. You only need to let them visit and let them go, the way you would let any temporary weather pass through. I want to mention something about the quality of your character that this leaving will reveal to you. There is a particular dignity that emerges in people who can leave well, not coldly, not dramatically, not with a lot of explanation, just well, with integrity intact, without leaving behind a mess they cannot maintain. This dignity is not something you can perform. It can only emerge from the actual conduct of the leaving. You have an opportunity in this leaving to discover this part of yourself in a way you may not have had occasion to discover before. Pay attention to it. It is one of the more enduring gifts that an ending can give to the person who walks through it. There is also a softer truth I want to name. The silence may, in the longest run, also serve the other person. Right now, in the immediate aftermath, it may not feel that way to them. But over time, silence allows people to grow in directions they could not grow in if they were still receiving inputs from the leaving party. By withdrawing your input, you give them a chance to develop their own conclusions, their own understanding, their own next chapter. Some of the most important growth in a person's life happens in the absence of someone they thought they could not live without. You may be giving this person the conditions for that kind of growth. You will not see the growth from where you will be. It will not be your business to see it. But the conditions you are leaving them with are not fundamentally hostile conditions. They are conditions in which their own life can resume in a way it could not while you were still tending the dying fire. There is something to learn from how animals respond to changing fires, because animals have an intelligence about warmth that humans have largely forgotten. A cat sleeping near a fire does not announce its departure when the warmth shifts. It simply gets up and finds a different warm place. There is no protest. There is no lengthy negotiation with the fire. The cat has read the changing temperature and has acted on the reading. The same intelligence is available to you. You have read the changing temperature. You are acting on the reading. You do not need to convince the fire to remain hot. You do not need to argue with reality about its rate of cooling. You only need to do what every creature with good instincts does when warmth shifts, which is to move toward where warmth still lives. The cat does not feel guilty for following its body. You do not need to feel guilty either. The body knows what it needs. Following it is one of the oldest forms of integrity available to any living thing. I want to address one more piece of internal weather you may be experiencing. A quiet grief. There is grief inside this. You love something. The thing is ending. Even if the ending is right, the loving was real. And the loss of what was real produces grief. I do not want to minimize this. I also want to remind you that grief is not the same as second guessing. You can grieve a relationship while being fully clear that the relationship is properly ending. Many people in the early stretches of their leaving mistake their grief for evidence that they have made the wrong choice. The grief is not evidence. It is just grief. It is the natural response of a tender heart to the closing of a chapter that mattered. Let it be present without letting it overrule your discernment. Both can coexist. The grief in time will soften into something else. It will not disappear. It will become a kind of quiet honoring. You will, in some future stretch, think of this person without sharpness. The thinking will be neutral, maybe even mildly fond. The fondness will not pull you back. It will simply exist as a small acknowledgement that there was real warmth in your life for a stretch, and that the warmth is now part of the larger landscape of what is shaped you. That neutrality is the resting state your grief is moving toward. You do not have to rush it. You only have to let it arrive. I want to speak briefly about what the next chapter looks like for you after the leaving is complete. The first part of the next chapter is rest. You will need it. Tending a long burning fire takes more out of you than you have been letting yourself notice. And after the fire is out, the body wants a stretch of recovery. Honor the wanting. Sleep more if you need to. Walk slower. Do less. The rest is not laziness. It is the body's wisdom about what kind of recovery is required. There will be plenty of room for new warmth later. Right now, the work is the recovery from the old warmth. The second part of the next chapter is the slow widening of your attention. With the connection no longer occupying the foreground of your inner field, the foreground becomes available for other things. You will notice the world around you with a different acuity. The sky. The faces of strangers. The textures of your own home. The particular taste of foods you have been eating without tasting. This widening is one of the underrated gifts of completed endings. You return to your own senses. You inhabit your own body more fully. The attention that was being spent elsewhere is now your own again, and your own attention properly directed is one of the most valuable resources you have. The third part of the next chapter is the slow approach of new connections. I will not predict the timing of these. I will only say that you become available after a leaving like this one to encounters that you were not available for before. Some of those encounters will be friendships. Some may be different forms of love in time. The category does not matter as much as the quality. The quality of what is now able to find you is higher than what was finding you while the fire was still burning. The fire was in some way a frequency that masked other frequencies. With it gone, the other frequencies become audible. Listen for them. They are quieter than the dying fire was, but they are real, and they are calibrated to the version of you that is emerging. There is a fourth part of the next chapter, and it is the discovery of new things you want. Once that were dormant during the long tending of the dying fire will begin to wake up. Some of them will surprise you. They will be small, specific, sometimes seemingly trivial, but they will carry energy that has not been available to you in some time. A book you suddenly want to read, a place you suddenly want to visit, a skill you suddenly want to learn. These small awakening wants are the early signs of a life that has room in it for itself again. Follow them. Do not require them to make sense. The wants know more than the analyzing mind does about what is supposed to come next. There is something to say about the ash that remains after a fire has fully burned, because ash itself is not nothing. Gardeners know this. Ash, properly returned to soil, makes the soil more fertile for what grows next. The end of a fire is therefore not the end of its contribution. The fire continues to give in a different form long after the flames are gone. Whatever you carry forward from this connection, the small wisdoms gained, the shape of what you will not accept again, the deeper sense of what you actually want, these are the ash. They are what the fire produced in you that will feed whatever you grow next. You did not waste your time tending this fire. The tending taught you things that no easier connection could have taught, and those things are now permanently part of the soil of your life. I also want to mention the practical question of what to do if the other person attempts to break the silence. They may. Not always, but often. They may write, they may call, they may approach mutual acquaintances to send messages. The silence you have chosen is a discipline, and the discipline will be tested. You do not need to engage with the tests. Letting a message go unanswered is not unkindness. It is the maintenance of the form you have chosen. The form is part of the leaving. Each time the silence is held, the leaving becomes more complete. Each time the silence is broken, the leaving has to begin again. Hold the silence. Not coldly, not dramatically, just steadily. There is a particular skill in not engaging with attempts to extend a closed conversation. The skill is not in finding the perfect refusal. The skill is in the calm inside you that knows the conversation is closed. Once that calm is steady, the external behavior follows naturally. You do not have to perform refusal. You simply act in alignment with what is already true inside you. The conversation is closed. The reaching toward you is not a reopening. It is a continuation of a previous condition that has now ended. Your silence in the face of it is not a new statement. It is the consistent expression of a state that was settled some time ago. You will, in a future stretch, hear something about this person from somewhere. Perhaps from a mutual contact. Perhaps from your own memories surfacing in an unexpected moment. Perhaps from a glimpse that arrives without warning. When you do, notice what you feel. The feeling will be a measure of where you are in the integration of this leaving. Early on, the feeling may be sharp. Later, it will be flatter. Eventually, it will be neutral, and the neutrality will tell you that the integration is complete. There is no rush to reach the neutral state. There is only the trusting that the state will arrive in its own time, because it always does when leavings have been done with integrity. I want to also acknowledge the possibility that you have been holding a quiet shame around this leaving. Some part of you may worry that the leaving makes you a less generous person, that the silence makes you cold, that the absence of explanation makes you unkind. I want to release you from these self-accusations. Leaving is not a moral failure. Silence is not coldness. Absence of explanation is not unkindness. These are forms, and forms are neutral. What gives a form its character is the spirit in which it is used. Your spirit in this leaving is one of integrity. The form will carry that spirit. It will not, in the long run, be experienced as unkindness by anyone who looks at it accurately. It will be experienced as what it is, a real ending, conducted with the cleanness that real endings require. There is also a longer-term question I want to touch lightly. Whether you're leaving in silence is what you would want done to you, or the situation reversed. This is the kind of question that can be asked to make a person doubt themselves, but it can also be answered honestly, and the honest answer is often yes. Most people, when faced with situations that are genuinely over, would prefer the cleanness of silence over the noise of an extended verbal closing. We tell ourselves we want explanation, but what we usually want is closure, and closure is more often produced by clean absence than by messy presence. By offering this person clean absence, you may be offering them what they would, in their wiser moments, prefer to receive. I want to take a moment to honor the version of you that has carried this situation up to this point. That version has been patient. That version has tried. That version has stayed longer than was strictly necessary. And the staying was not weakness. The staying was care. You wanted to be sure. You wanted to give the connection every chance. You did not leave at the first sign of difficulty. You waited until you were certain. The certainty is here now. The waiting was not wasted time. It was the careful work of someone who does not leave lightly, and that quality of yours is one of the most valuable things about you. Honor it. The next stretch of your life will benefit from the same quality. Now I want to draw your attention to what is becoming visible as the fire goes out. The room around the fire was always there, but the brightness of the flames made it harder to see. As the fire fades, the room becomes more visible. There are doors in the room you had not noticed before. There are windows whose views had been obscured by the firelight. There are corners of the room that contain things you did not know you owned. The leaving of this connection is not just the ending of one thing. It is the opening of access to a much wider room than you had been seeing while the fire was at its height. Walk through the wider room. There is more in it than you have been told. The work of the channel known as Mary Tarot has often returned to this particular reframe, that endings are openings, and tonight I want you to feel the truth of it without it. Sounding like a slogan. Endings actually are openings in the strict mechanical sense. When one configuration of your life concludes, the configuration releases its hold on the resources it was using. Those resources become available for the next configuration. This is not a metaphor. It is a physics. The energy you were spending on the fire is now available for whatever you choose to spend it on. The attention you were giving the fire is now available for whatever you choose to give it to. The rooms you were keeping warm for the fire are now available for other purposes. The opening is real. It is happening as the fire goes out. You can step into the opening at whatever pace you are ready for. I want to leave you with one more small observation about the silence itself. It is not a punishment, and it is not an absence. It is a sacred form. Silence has been used throughout long stretches of human history as the proper container for endings that words cannot hold. The reason silence has carried that role for so long is that silence preserves dignity in a way that words sometimes cannot. Words can be twisted. Words can be misquoted. Words can become weapons in the hands of someone who is hurt. Silence cannot be twisted. Silence is just silence. It is the cleanest form available, and you have, with some inner wisdom, recognized that this situation deserves a clean form. Take a slow breath. The fire is almost out. You have done what was yours to do. The remaining work is just the walking. And the walking is going to be smaller and quieter than you may have feared. You do not need to brace yourself for a difficult conversation that you have decided not to have. You only need to live the next stretch of your life the way you would have lived it anyway, without that connection requiring tending. The silence will hold itself. You do not have to defend it. It will simply exist around the place where the fire used to be, and it will in its own time become an ordinary feature of your inner landscape, no longer charged, simply quiet. Until next time, walk gently into the silence. Carry tenderness for what was. Carry steadiness for what comes. Trust that the leaving is right, that the silence is right, that the version of you walking forward is the version of you the next chapter has been waiting for. The fire did its work. You did yours. What is ending well. What is beginning has been waiting for this exact ending in order to begin. Step softly forward. The room beyond is wider than you had been told.